The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room ever built by any living species. It floated at the center of a massive space station, surrounded by stars and silence. Inside, thousands of alien delegates sat in curved balconies that rose so high they disappeared into shadow. 42 species, 42 flags, and today, every single one of them had voted the same way. Kill the human girl. Varel stood at the center of the chamber. He was tall, even by the standards of his own people. His forearms rested calmly at his sides, and his silver skin reflected the cold blue light of the room. He was the High Speaker of the Council, the voice of the galaxy, and he had just delivered a sentence that would be broadcast to every corner of civilized space. The human prisoner, designation Yuna, has been found guilty of unprovoked aggression against the Rokai Dominion, he said, his voice deep and slow. She is charged with the destruction of 3 patrol vessels and the deaths of over 400 Rokai soldiers. The council has voted. The sentence is death. The execution will be carried out publicly, in this chamber, in 27 minutes. The chamber erupted in approval. Hundreds of species clapped, stomped, clicked, or vibrated in their own way. It was the sound of a galaxy agreeing on something for the first time in decades. In the human section of the chamber, which was small and tucked into the lowest balcony, like an afterthought, a woman stood. Her name was Mireille. She was the only human diplomat assigned to the council, and she had held this position for 9 years. She was not young. She was not loud, but when she spoke, she did so with the kind of calm that made people stop and listen. I formally object to this sentence, Mireille said. Her voice carried through the chamber's audio system without a single shake. Vorel looked down at her. Your objection is noted, Counselor Mireille. It is overruled. I expected that, she said, but I am required by Earth's Interstellar Conduct Protocol to inform this council that any act of war against a human citizen will be treated as an act of war against Earth. She paused. You have been warned. This warning will not be repeated. For a moment, the chamber was quiet. Then someone laughed. It was a delegate from one of the insect worlds, and the sound was sharp and buzzing. Others joined in. The laughter spread through the chamber like a wave, and soon the entire gallery was filled with amusement. Humans, what could they possibly do? They were a young species. They had only been in space for 200 years. Their fleet was small. Their territory was a handful of border worlds that nobody else wanted. They had no real power, no real technology, no real army. They were tolerated by the galaxy, the way a grown animal tolerates a small insect buzzing near its head. They were nothing. Mireille sat down. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply opened a small device on her wrist, typed a single word, and sent it through an encrypted channel that no one in the chamber could detect. The word was fallen. Then she folded her hands and waited. Down below, in the execution chamber, 2 Rokai guards dragged a girl through a metal door. She was small, thin. Her dark hair was messy, and her clothes were torn and dirty. Her hands were locked behind her back, with energy restraints that hummed softly. She was barefoot. She looked like she had not slept in days. Her name was Yuna. She was 19 years old. The guards pushed her to the center of the room, where a single metal platform waited under a bright white light. Behind the platform stood a weapon, a long energy cannon mounted on a mechanical arm. It was pointed at the spot where her head would be. The weapon was designed to be dramatic. The council wanted a show. They wanted the galaxy to see what happened when a lesser species stepped out of line. Yuna knelt on the platform without being told. She did not cry. She did not beg. She looked up at the balconies above her, where thousands of alien eyes stared down like she was an animal in a cage. She looked at them for a long time, studying their faces, their expressions, their certainty. And then She smiled. It was a small smile, calm, almost gentle, the kind of smile someone gives when they know something that nobody else in the room knows. Varel saw it. It bothered him. He could not explain why, but something about the girl's face made his stomach tighten. He shook the feeling away. She was a human. She was nothing. High in the balconies, a young alien named Keta leaned forward in her seat. She was an Ilvari, a species known for their sharp minds and careful observation. She was a junior delegate, barely old enough to attend sessions, and she had been quiet all day. But now she was staring at the screen in front of her, which showed the prisoner's biometric data. Heart rate 62, resting. Cortisol level 0. Adrenaline baseline. The girl was not afraid, not even a little. Keta turned to the senior Ilvari delegate beside her and whispered, "Something is wrong. Look at her readings. She is completely calm." The senior delegate glanced at the screen and shrugged. "She is in shock. Humans do that. Their brains shut down when they face death." "No," Keta said quietly. "That is not shock. I have studied human biology. This is not what shock looks like." She looked back at Yuna's face on the screen. The girl was still smiling. "She is not afraid because she does not believe she is going to die." The senior delegate waved her off. "She is a prisoner. She will be dead in 25 minutes. Stop worrying." Keta did not stop worrying. She pulled up every file the council had on humanity and began reading. Something was wrong. She could feel it, the way you feel a storm before it arrives, when the air goes still and the sky turns a color that does not have a name. Down in the execution chamber, one of the Rokai guards stepped close to Yuna to adjust her restraints. She turned her head slightly and looked at him. Her eyes were dark and steady. "You should have read her warning," she whispered. The guard did not understand. He stepped back and returned to his post. The countdown clock on the wall read 27 minutes. It began to tick. Deep in the black space between two nebulae, where no star shone and no signal traveled, a ship sat in perfect silence. It had no running lights. It gave off no heat. To every sensor in the galaxy, it did not exist. Its name was the Baiko, and it had been waiting in this exact spot for 11 months. Inside the ship, a man sat alone in a dark room, staring at a screen. His name was Teho. He was 31 years old, built like someone who had spent most of his life carrying heavy things and running long distances. His face was calm, but his eyes were the kind of eyes that had seen things most people never would. He was a captain in a division of the human military that had no official name, no public record, and no existence on any document the galaxy had ever seen. The screen in front of him blinked once. A single word appeared. Fallen. Teho stared at it for 3 seconds. Then he closed his eyes, breathed out slowly, and stood up. He walked to the door and pressed a button on the wall. "Jisoo," he said, "wake everything up." 3 levels below, a woman named Jisoo was already moving before the order came through. She had seen the signal at the same moment Teho had, because she had built the system that received it. Jisoo was 30 years old, small, with short hair and oil stains on her hands that never fully washed away. She was the chief engineer of the Baiko, and she was possibly the most dangerous person on the ship. Not because she could fight, but because she could build things that broke the rules of what the galaxy thought was possible. She typed a command into her console, and the Baiko began to change. Panels slid open along the hull. Systems that had been sleeping for months powered on one by one. The ship's true shape began to reveal itself, and it was not the small cargo vessel it had pretended to be. It was a mobile command platform, bristling with antenna arrays, quantum communication nodes, and something buried deep in its core that Jisoo simply called the box. The box was Project Dakebi. Fewer than 30 humans alive knew what it did. Jisoo was one of them. She had helped build it. Systems are live, she said into her headset. Dokkaebi is ready on your word. Taeho did not give the word yet. Instead, he opened a channel to a different ship, one that was much closer to the council station than anyone would have believed possible. Doha, he said, you're on. The voice that came back was steady and clear. We've been on for 6 months, Taeho. Just say when. Doha was the commanding officer of a fleet called Black Tide. 12 ships. They were not large. They were not impressive to look at. But they had been sitting in a fold of bent space less than 2,000 kilometers from the council station for half a year, completely invisible, watching everything. Doha had watched the trial. She had watched the vote. She had watched Mirai deliver her warning, and she had watched the council laugh. She had not laughed. Decloak on my signal, Taeho said. Not before. Understood. Taeho turned back to Jisoo. How long until the network is live? 4 minutes, Jisoo said. Every node is responding. All 19 cells are awake. Across the galaxy, on 19 different alien worlds, humans who had been living ordinary lives for years received a single pulse on hidden devices. A bartender on a Tasari trading world put down the glass she was cleaning and walked into a back room. A mechanic on a Rokai shipyard wiped his hands, nodded to his coworker, and disappeared into a corridor. A teacher on an Ilvari colony world dismissed her class early, locked the door, and opened a panel in the floor. They were sleeper agents, every single one of them, placed years ago, trained for a moment exactly like this. Back on the council station, Mirai was walking. She moved through the corridors with the calm pace of someone going for a stroll, but her path was precise. She was heading to the human embassy's emergency shuttle. A Tasari guard noticed her and stepped into her way. Counselor Mirai, the session is not over. Where are you going? Mirai looked at him with an expression that was almost kind. Somewhere safe, she said. I suggest you do the same. The guard frowned, but stepped aside. Humans were strange, but they were not threatening. Everyone knew that. High in the observation gallery, Keto was not watching the execution preparations. Her screen was filled with files, reports, intelligence briefings, everything the council had on Earth and its people. And the more she read, the more her stomach turned. The data was wrong. Not wrong in the way that old data sometimes was, with small errors and outdated numbers. It was wrong in a way that felt intentional. Humanity's fleet size was listed as 47 ships. Their military personnel was listed as 12,000. Their technological capability was rated as level 3, which meant they were considered roughly equal to a species that had just discovered space travel. But there were gaps. Entire sections of the files were empty. Intelligence reports that should have been updated years ago had simply stopped. Sensor data from human-controlled space was sparse, almost non-existent, as if something was blocking it. And buried deep in a footnote that nobody had apparently bothered to read, a Rokai intelligence officer had written a single line 8 years ago. Human information environment appears to be artificially constructed. Recommend full reassessment. The reassessment had never happened. Keta's hands were shaking. She looked up at the execution chamber feed. The countdown read 19 minutes. The weapon was being calibrated. Yuna was still kneeling, still calm, still smiling that strange little smile. And then every screen in the council station flickered. A new signal cut through every channel, every frequency, every broadcast system in the galaxy simultaneously. It was a human voice, male, calm, speaking in the common galactic language with a slight accent that nobody could place. This is Captain Taeho of the Earth Defense Directive. You are holding a citizen of Earth. You now have 19 minutes to release her. After that, we will come and get her, and we will not be polite. The message played once. Then it was gone. The Grand Chamber erupted. Varel shouted for order. Dren, the Rokai warlord, slammed his fist on his console and ordered his fleet to find the signal source. Technicians scrambled to trace it. They could not. The signal had bounced through 40,000 relay points across the galaxy in less than a second. The encryption was so advanced that the Council's best analysts could not even identify what language the code was written in. It was not based on any known mathematical framework. It was something entirely new. Dren turned to Vorel. "It is a bluff," he said. "Humans do not have this capability." Vorel nodded. "Proceed with the execution." In the observation gallery, Keta stared at her screen. The footnote from 8 years ago burned in her mind. Human information environment appears to be artificially constructed. 4 decades. And now, the clock was ticking. The first ship appeared at minute 15. It came out of nothing. One moment there was empty space above the Council station, and the next moment there was a ship. It did not fly in from a distance. It did not come through a jump gate. It simply existed where it had not existed before, as if reality had blinked and something new had slipped in during the darkness. The ship was small, maybe a third the size of a standard Rokai cruiser. It was dark gray and angular, shaped like a blade, and it made no sound on any frequency. It just hung there, still and quiet, like a knife balanced on its edge. Dren reacted instantly. He was a warlord, and warlords did not hesitate. He gave the order, and 4 Rokai battleships opened fire. Plasma bolts, energy beams, and kinetic rounds tore through space toward the human vessel. Every single one of them hit their target, and every single one passed through the ship as if it were made of smoke. The bolts continued past the vessel and disappeared into the void. The ship did not move. It did not dodge. The weapons simply had no effect, as though the ship existed in a slightly different version of space, one where the Rokai's weapons could not touch it. Dren stared at his tactical display. "What is this?" he said. Nobody answered. Nobody knew. At minute 12, 11 more ships appeared. They formed a perfect ring around the Council station. Same design, same silence, same impossible technology. They did not fire. They did not communicate. They simply waited, like wolves circling a campfire, patient and unhurried. In the grand chamber, the laughter had stopped. The delegates were no longer amused. Some of them were standing. A few were already heading for the exits. Vorel raised his 4 hands and demanded order. "These are 12 small ships," he said, his voice steady but louder than it needed to be. "We have 6,000 warships at our command. This changes nothing. The execution will proceed." But at minute 10, something happened that changed everything. Across the galaxy, in shipping lanes and trade routes and orbital docks around dozens of alien worlds, human ships began to change. Cargo haulers that had been carrying grain and metal for years suddenly dropped their outer panels, revealing weapons arrays and armored hulls beneath. Mining vessels in asteroid belts powered up engines that should not have fit inside their frames. Freighters that had been docked peacefully at alien stations for months lit up with energy signatures that made every sensor within 1,000 kilometers scream. Thousands of them, in every corner of the galaxy, all at once. They had been hiding in plain sight. Every ugly, slow, harmless-looking human ship that the galaxy had ignored was a disguise. Beneath the rust and the dented panels and the outdated registration codes, they were warships. Real warships. And now, the mask was off. The reports flooded into the Council station like water through a broken wall. Human warships in Tasari space. Human warships in the Ilvari system. Human warships surrounding Rokai supply lines. The numbers kept climbing. 300, 800, 2,000, 4,000. The count did not stop. Vorel's hands were shaking now. He turned to Dren. "Destroy them, all of them, now." Dren mobilized the Rokai Armada. 6,000 warships, the largest military force in the galaxy, began to move toward the Council station and the 12 small ships that surrounded it. It was an overwhelming force. It should have been enough, to crush anything. At minute 7, Doha gave an order from the bridge of her command ship. She spoke one word. Show them. One of the Black Tide ships fired. A single shot. It was a thin beam of white light, almost beautiful, that crossed the distance between the small human vessel and the nearest Rokai dreadnought in less than a heartbeat. The dreadnought was enormous. It was the size of a city, carrying 10,000 crew members and enough weapons to burn a continent. Its shields were the most advanced the Rokai had ever built. The beam went through the shields as if they did not exist. It went through the hull. It went through the reactor core. It came out the other side. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dreadnought split in half. The two pieces drifted apart slowly, glowing orange at the edges where the metal had been cut clean. Secondary explosions rippled along the wreckage. Escape pods began launching, hundreds of them, scattering like seeds from a dying flower. The grand chamber went silent, not quiet. The kind of silence that happens when every living thing in a room forgets how to breathe at the same time. At minute 5, Tejo's voice filled the chamber again. That was a warning shot. The next one will not be. Dren stood at his command console and stared at the wreckage of his finest ship. He had fought wars for 40 years. He had conquered worlds and broken armies, and never once felt fear. But now his hands were still on the console, and he could not make them move. At minute 3, the doors of the grand chamber burst open, and Keta ran in. She was holding a datapad above her head, and she was shouting. Nobody had ever heard an Ilvari shout before. Listen to me, she screamed. Every report we have on humanity is false. All of it. Their fleet is not 47 ships. It is over 10,000. Their technology is not level 3. It is beyond anything we have a classification for. Their military is not 12,000. It is in the millions. She threw the datapad onto the main display, and the numbers filled the screen. Someone fed us false intelligence for decades. We have been fighting a species we know nothing about. Vorel stared at the numbers. His silver skin had gone pale. He looked down at the execution chamber, where Yuna still knelt under the white light. She was looking up at him. She was still smiling. At minute 1, the execution weapon powered up. The energy cannon hummed, its barrel glowing bright blue as it charged. The broadcast was still live. Every world in the galaxy was watching. This was the moment the Council would prove its strength. The cannon reached full power. The targeting system locked onto Yuna's head. And then it shut down. The lights in the chamber flickered. The cannon's glow died. Every screen on the station went dark for 2 seconds, then came back on showing a single image. The Earth flag. Then the systems returned to normal, but the weapon was dead. Completely dead. Its code had been rewritten from the inside. Jisoo, sitting in her chair on the Baiko, 3 light-years away, leaned back and cracked her knuckles. She had been inside the station's computer systems for 14 minutes. She had watched the cannon charge. She had let it get to 99% power before she killed it, because she wanted them to feel how close they had come. In the execution chamber, Yuna stood up. She pulled her wrists apart, and the energy restraints shattered like glass. Her arms were laced with something beneath the skin, a nanotube network that gave her the strength of something far more than human. She had been able to break those restraints at any time. She had chosen not to until now. She looked up at Vorel and spoke in a voice that carried through the silent chamber. My brother says hello. Every light on the entire station went out at once, and for 5 seconds there was nothing but blackness and the sound of alien hearts beating too fast. When the lights came back on, Yuna was gone, and standing in the grand chamber, spread across the floor between the alien delegates, were 200 human soldiers in black armor. They held no weapons in their hands, but every delegate in the room understood that they did not need any. They had appeared without a door opening, without a shuttle docking, without a single alarm going off. They stood perfectly still. 200 of them, and not one of them made a sound. The galaxy had been watching. Every world, every species, every living being with a screen had just seen a 19-year-old girl break free from her own execution, while an unknown human army materialized inside the most secure building in the galaxy, like ghosts walking through walls. The 27 minutes were over, and everything was different now. Nobody was dead. That was the thing that shook the galaxy more than the ships, more than the soldiers, more than the girl who had smiled while an execution cannon charged above her head. When the lights came back on, and 200 human soldiers stood in the grand chamber, like statues carved from shadow, not a single delegate had been harmed. Not one scratch, not one bruise, not one drop of alien blood on the polished floor. The humans could have killed everyone in that room. They had proven in 27 minutes that they had the power to do it. They had ships that could not be hit, weapons that could cut a dreadnought in half with a single shot, soldiers that could appear inside a sealed building without making a sound. They could have ended the Galactic Council that day. They could have burned the station and everything on it, and called it justice. They chose not to. And that, more than anything, was what terrified the 42 species watching. The doors of the grand chamber opened, and a woman walked in. She was not tall. She was not physically imposing, but she moved with the kind of certainty that made the air around her feel heavier. She wore dark tactical armor, with no markings, no rank insignia, nothing to identify her except the way every human soldier in the room turned their heads slightly toward her as she passed, the way planets turn toward a sun. Her name was Doha. She walked to the center of the chamber, to the same spot where Varel had stood when he sentenced a girl to death, and she looked up at the balconies full of alien delegates who had been laughing less than half an hour ago. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She spoke the way someone speaks when they have already won, and there is nothing left to prove. My name is Doha. I am the commanding officer of Earth's Black Tide Division. What happened in the last 27 minutes was not an invasion. It was a retrieval operation. We came to take back our citizen. She is safe now. She paused, and her eyes moved slowly across the chamber, meeting the gaze of every senior delegate, one by one. But we are not leaving yet, because we have something to discuss. She raised her hand, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the room. It showed a document, written in every galactic language simultaneously. This is the Earth Sovereignty Accord, Doha said. It is simple. Earth will be recognized as a sovereign galactic power with full territorial rights, full military autonomy, and a permanent seat on this council. Our borders will be respected. Our citizens will be protected under galactic law, and no species, no coalition, and no council will ever again have the authority to sentence a human being to death. The chamber was still. No one spoke. You have a choice, Doha continued. You can sign this accord today, and we will leave this station peacefully. We will share technology. We will help your worlds. We will be the ally that this galaxy has needed for a very long time. She lowered her hand. Or you can refuse, and you can see what happens when a species that has been hiding its true strength for 200 years decides it no longer needs to hide. Vorel was the first to speak. He had regained some of his composure, though his four hands were still trembling at his sides. You cannot force your way onto this council, he said. There are rules, there are procedures, there are laws that have governed this galaxy for thousands of years. Doha looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. You ordered the execution of a teenage girl on live broadcast to send a message to her entire species. You made her kneel under a weapon, and you broadcast it to every world in the galaxy, so that billions could watch her die. She tilted her head slightly. Do not lecture us about rules. Vorel opened his mouth. Then he closed it. At the far end of the chamber, Dren was standing at his console, staring at numbers he could not believe. In the 27 minutes since Teho's broadcast, human forces across the galaxy had moved with a precision that should not have been possible. 70% of the Rokai Armada, the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, was now surrounded, disabled, or locked in place. Their navigation systems had been overwritten. Their weapons had been powered down remotely. Their communications were being filtered through human systems that decided what messages got through and what messages did not. 6,000 warships, the pride of the Rokai Dominion, and they were helpless. Dren was a warrior. He had built his career on strength and violence and the simple truth that the strongest army wins. But he was not stupid. He looked at the numbers and he understood what they meant. Fighting was not an option. It had never been an option. The humans had made sure of that before the first shot was ever fired. He said nothing. He sat down. In the observation gallery, Keta stood up. She was shaking, not from fear, but from something else. Something that felt like the ground shifting beneath her feet. She had spent the last 27 minutes reading files and running calculations and understanding, piece by piece, the scale of what humanity had built in secret. And now, she understood something that most of the delegates in this room did not. The humans were not asking for permission. They were offering the galaxy a chance to accept reality gracefully. Keta walked to the front of the Ilvari section and activated her speaking light. Her voice was thin and young, but the chamber was so quiet that everyone heard her. The Ilvari delegation recognizes Earth's claim, she said. We support the Sovereignty Accord. Her senior delegate grabbed her arm and hissed at her to sit down. She pulled free and remained standing. Look at what is happening, she said, loud enough for others to hear. They have already won. The only question is whether we are smart enough to accept it. One by one, other delegations began to follow. The Vreen, the Solathi, the Pale Kingdoms of the Outer Rim. Species that had always been uncomfortable with the Council's arrogance, saw an opportunity and took it. Species that were afraid made the practical choice. The votes came slowly at first, then faster, like stones rolling down a hill. Vorel was the last. He stood alone at his podium, his silver skin dull under the chamber lights, and he looked at the document floating in front of him. Everything he had built, everything his species had controlled for centuries. It was ending, not with a war, not with a battle, but with a girl who smiled, and a fleet that appeared from nowhere, and a species that had been playing a game so long and so patient that nobody had even realized they were playing. He looked across the chamber and saw Yuna. She was standing beside a man who looked like her, the same dark eyes, the same steady expression. Teho had entered the station during the blackout. Brother and sister stood together, clean and composed, watching him with faces that held no anger, no hatred, no triumph, just calm. Yuna gave him a small nod. Vorel signed the accord. The chamber was quiet as the document updated. All 42 signatures now complete. Then the main doors opened, and Mireille walked in. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn that morning, but something about her had changed. She moved differently now. She walked to the human delegations section, but she did not sit in the small seat at the lowest balcony where she had spent 9 years being ignored. She walked to the main floor. She took a seat at the center table, a seat that had been empty since the council was founded, because no one had ever thought a human would sit there. She sat down, folded her hands, and looked at the delegates around her. I believe we have work to do, she said. Keta, still standing in the Ilvari section, watched Mireille with wide eyes. Later that evening, When the chamber had emptied, and the station was buzzing with confusion and fear, and 1,000 urgent messages flying in every direction, Keta found Mireille in a corridor, and asked her the question that had been burning in her mind. "How long have you been ready for this?" Mireille looked at her. Her expression was kind, but her eyes were old, much older than her face. "Since before we left Earth," she said. As Mireille walked away, Tejo stood alone in a quiet corner of the station, reading a message on his secure device. It was from Earth Command, short and simple. Phase 1 complete. Begin Phase 2. He read it twice. Then he deleted it, and looked out the window at the stars. The galaxy had shifted, but humanity was not finished. 6 months passed, and the galaxy was not the same. The first thing most species noticed was the ships. Human vessels no longer hid behind rusted panels and false registration codes. They moved through galactic space openly now, sleek and dark and fast, and every species that saw them remembered what those ships had done in 27 minutes. But the ships were not carrying weapons anymore. They were carrying doctors. On the Ilvari homeworld, a human medical team set up a field hospital in a region that had been struggling with a disease for 30 years. Within 2 weeks, they had developed a treatment. The Ilvari had been told that a cure was impossible. The humans simply had not agreed with that conclusion. On a Tasari agricultural colony, human engineers installed a water purification system that turned poisoned ground into farmland. The Tasari farmers stood and watched machines do in a day what their own technology could not do in a generation. On a Rokai border world, where famine had been creeping closer for years, human freighters arrived with food and seeds and soil supplements that needed no payment and no contract. Humanity did not just reveal its strength, it revealed its value. And for many species, that was harder to understand than the weapons. Yuna did not return to Earth after the rescue. She stayed at the council station, not because anyone asked her to, but because she chose to. She became something she never expected to be, a symbol, not of war, not of power, but of what happens when a species refuses to answer cruelty with cruelty. The girl the galaxy had tried to kill, who knelt under a cannon and smiled, who broke her own chains when the time was right, and whose people tore apart the galactic order without taking a single life. News networks across 42 systems ran her image constantly. Some species feared her, some admired her, but everyone knew her name. 6 months after the Accord, the Council held its first anniversary session. For the first time in its history, a human was invited to deliver the opening address. They asked Yuna. She stood at the same podium where Varel had sentenced her to death. The same bright lights, the same curved balconies rising into shadow, the same thousands of alien eyes looking down. But this time, the chamber was quiet, not because of fear, but because of something close to respect. She spoke simply, the way she always did. 6 months ago, I knelt on that platform over there, and I waited to die. I was not afraid. Not because I am brave. I am not particularly brave. I was not afraid because I knew my people would come for me. That is what humans do. We come for each other. We always have. It is the one thing about us that has never changed. Not in 10,000 years of our history, and not in 200 years of traveling between stars. She paused and looked across the chamber. You tried to kill me to send a message. I understand that. I do not agree with it, but I understand the thinking behind it. You believed we were small. You believed we were weak. And you believed that killing one of us would make the rest of us afraid. She shook her head slightly. You were wrong, not because we are strong, but because fear has never been the thing that moves us. It has always been something else. She did not say what that something else was. She did not need to. Everyone in the room already knew. High in the Olvari section, Keta watched the speech with her hands folded in her lap. She had changed in the last 6 months. She was no longer a junior delegate. Her decision to be the first to recognize humanity's claim had made her famous among her own people. And she had been promoted to serve as the Olvari liaison to Earth. She spent most of her time with Mireille now, and the two of them had developed something that surprised them both. A real friendship. After the ceremony, Keta found Mireille in one of the station's observation lounges, drinking tea and watching ships drift past the windows. "Can I ask you something?" Keta said, sitting beside her. "You always can." That day, the 27 minutes, I have studied it, I have read every report and every analysis, and the thing that I still cannot understand is not the technology, or the soldiers, or the ships. She paused. It is how calm all of you were, every single human on that station. Mireille, you walked to your shuttle like you were going to lunch. Tejo's voice on the broadcast sounded like he was ordering breakfast. She smiled while a weapon was pointed at her head. Keta looked at her. How were you all so calm?" Mireille set down her tea. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle but honest. "We were not calm," she said. "We were furious, every single one of us." Tejo's hands were shaking when he gave that broadcast. Doha told me later that she wanted to burn the station down the moment she saw Yuna on her knees. And I sat in that chamber and watched them laugh at my warning. And I felt a kind of anger that I had not felt in years. She looked at Keta. "We were not calm. We just do not let fury make us sloppy." Keta thought about that for a long time. On a quiet space station at the edge of Rokai territory, Dren sat alone in a room that used to be his war office. He had been stripped of his rank. His armada, the fleet that was supposed to make the galaxy tremble, had been taken apart in 27 minutes by a species he had dismissed as insects. His career was over. His legacy was shame. But he was not hiding. He had sent a message to one person, and one person only, and he had asked for a meeting. Tejo arrived alone. No guards, no weapons. He walked into the room and sat across from the Rokai warlord as if they were old friends, meeting for a drink. Dren studied him for a long time. Then he asked the question that had kept him awake for 6 months. "How did you hide so much for so long? Your ships were everywhere. Your agents were on our worlds. Your technology was generations beyond ours. And we never saw it. Not once. How?" Tejo leaned back in his chair. "Your council looked at us and saw a small young species with a handful of ships and a few border colonies. You saw what you expected to see. We simply made sure that what you expected to see was exactly what we showed you." "But why hide it all?" Dren pressed. "If you had this power, why not use it? Why pretend to be weak?" Tejo was quiet for a moment. "Because power used carelessly destroys the one who holds it," he said. "We learned that lesson on our own world, many times, in many wars. We almost destroyed ourselves with it. So when we came to the stars, and found a galaxy full of species that measured strength by how loudly they could threaten each other, we made a choice. We chose to be quiet. We chose to watch. We chose to prepare. And we chose to wait until the galaxy gave us no other option." He looked at Dren. "You gave us no other option." Dren said nothing. After a while, he nodded. On the Ilvari homeworld, in a quiet archive beneath the Council's original founding building, Vorel sat at a desk and wrote his final entry in the Council's historical record. He had resigned the week after the Accord. His species had not asked him to. He simply knew that his time was over. He wrote slowly, choosing each word with the care of a man who knew that these words would be read for centuries. "We made the oldest mistake any civilization can make. We assumed that because a species was quiet, it was weak. We assumed that because they did not threaten us, they could not hurt us. We assumed that because they were young, they were foolish. The humans were never weak. They were never foolish. They were patient, and patience, I have learned too late, is the most dangerous quality a species can possess. He set down his pen and did not write again. Far away, on the Baiko, Jisoo was doing what she always did, building something new. Her workshop was a mess of wires and screens and half-finished devices that hummed with energy. A colleague walked in and looked around at the chaos. "So," the colleague said, leaning against the doorframe, "everyone keeps asking, what was Project Dokebi exactly? What did it actually do?" Jisoo looked up from her work and grinned. It was the kind of grin that made people slightly nervous. "That was Phase 1, she said. "You do not want to know what Phase 2 is." The colleague decided not to ask again. On the council station, late at night, when the corridors were empty and the lights were dimmed, Yuna stood at a viewport and looked out at the stars. They stretched in every direction, countless and cold and beautiful, and she watched them the way someone watches the ocean, with the understanding that they are looking at something much larger than themselves. She heard footsteps behind her, and did not need to turn around to know who it was. Taeho stood beside her. He did not speak for a while. The two of them had never needed many words between them. "Is it really over?" Yuna asked. Taeho put a hand on her shoulder. "It is not over," he said. "It is just the beginning, but this time they will know who we are." They stood together in silence, watching the stars. The next morning, a message was transmitted from Earth to every inhabited world in the galaxy. It was not encrypted, it was not hidden. It was sent openly, on every frequency, in every language, so that no species could claim they had not received it. It was simple and short, and it read, "Humanity does not start wars. But if you bring war to our door, we will finish it. Not with cruelty, but with a certainty so absolute it will make you wish we had simply been cruel. We are not your enemy, but we will never again be your victim. We are here, we have always been here. And now, finally, you know." Across the galaxy, 42 species read the message and understood, some for the first time, and some too late, that the universe had changed. Not because a new weapon had been built, or a new empire had risen, but because a quiet species had finally spoken, and the sound of its voice had shaken the stars themselves. The galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere on a small blue world at the edge of the spiral arm, where the oceans were deep and the skies were wide, and the people had spent 10,000 years learning how to survive each other before they ever learned to survive the stars, someone looked up at the night sky, smiled, and whispered a single word that meant everything and nothing, and all the hope a species could carry in its short and stubborn and magnificent heart.